when I first got into like the whole dissident sphere, I first identified with a certain ideology that's different from monarchism uh, from the 20th century. And that was kind of the first thing that got me into the door with regard to dissident politics. But I, people change, people's political views change over time. So around like 2017, what basically happened was that, I read the main book written by the person who's like the main founder of the certain political ideology from the 20th century that I was first interested in back in 2016, 2017. And what happened was that I realized that this person was anti Slavic, and that caused me to abandon the first dissident ideology that I adopted. And I kind of slowly became my support for this first ideology kind of waned over time, and I adopted more of like a anything but liberal democracy mindset. Um, but people change, your personality changes, and I would say that up until fairly recently, I've been kind of undecided as to what should replace democracy, but now I think I've found the one true political ideology. So, what happened was I got there was like this whole drama that happened on the internet like months ago or earlier this year where there was like some incident in South Africa where Julius Malema was chanting was basically calling for the deaths of the Boer population of South Africa. And there was this kind of whole drama between like the tankies, like who are like the communists, and the dissident right over this whole issue. And seeing that drama basically made me realize that I don't like political factions anymore, and I don't think that politics is healthy for society anymore. So something just kind of clicked, and I decided that monarchism is the best system of government. So, yeah, I'm a monarchist now. So, these are the arguments that originally made me stop believing in democracy. You have, like, the issue that the common people can't think for themselves. I'm sorry, but the truth of the matter is that most people conform to wider society and simply can't think independently of society. The mainstream culture and media controls what people think. So that's the first issue with democracy. It's just the masses simply can't think for themselves. And so what happens is that this creates an undemocratic elite in practice. Um, all governments grow to become ruled by an elite regardless of how democratic they might seem at first. Academic Agent talks about this. Um, there's like the iron law of oligarchy that's kind of popular within kind of the academic agent community, um, and so on and so forth. So you have the iron law of oligarchy. You have this inevitable process because of the fact that the masses can't think for themselves. But even if the masses could think for themselves, you inevitably have the iron law of oligarchy kicking in. And an elite forms regardless of everything else, and this elite necessarily takes power away from the people. It's not possible to have the people in power. And if one example of this is the American Revolution, that was a top-down revolution. It wasn't a bottom-up revolution. The elite institutions inevitably rise to control society without the will of the people. Again, the iron law of oligarchy, Academic Agent talks about this all the time. And today, as a result of the iron law of oligarchy, we have the quote-unquote globalists in charge. And so real power rests with the media institutions and the academic institutions, i.e. the globalists, as well as, other institutions as well, banks, um, the World Economic Forum, or whatever. And so not only does democracy fail to do the thing that it claims to do, but it also creates bad policy. Elites in Republican forms of government, or maybe not Republican, but Democratic Republican forms of government, are incentivized to harm society. They are incentivized to destroy the ethical standards in order to gain support from people who are morally bankrupt. They're incentivized for unchecked immigration in order to gain more votes. If at least if you're a political party or an elite that gains more support from immigration, you're incentivized to have unchecked immigration. And you're also incentivized to support toxic or bad people within the economic system, particularly if we're combining capitalism with democracy. There's bad people within capitalism, there's evil, psychopathic people within the free market. And if you're a democracy, those people are going to provide candidates with donations. You're incentivized to support the bad people within capitalism. So the media and universities. These institutions have real power in society rather than the voters. These institutions set the general trend, and this dictates which political figures are allowed in elected office and which are not. Uh, and this network of institutions forms the general consensus of the elites. And there's different names for this, but Curtis Yarvin calls this the Cathedral. And so the reason why the elites are in power is not because of any kind of conspiracy, it's just a general consensus of media and academic elites. And I think that this theory kind of explains things more because of Occam's razor than any kind of wild conspiracy. But there's the issue that made me not only support democracy but believe in monarchism in particular, which is the issue of factions and political parties. So in addition to the problems with democracy listed before, I recently came to the realization that there is an additional problem with democracy that only monarchy can solve. So fascism, communism, Putinism, Islamism, these other ideologies can't solve this problem. And that is the problem of factions and political parties. So political factions and parties cause division in society, but they also create this toxic mass involvement in the political process that I think is kind of bad for the soul and that I don't really like. This mass involvement in the political process is bad for the following reasons. It takes brain power and time away from other aspects of people's lives. So if you're like a farmer in Iowa or something, instead of just tending to your crops, you now have to invest brain power into following politics, watching these debates, and so on and so forth. It forces people to have political opinions. So I really don't like this thing, the impact that democracy has on the culture, where people who would otherwise be apolitical are now forced by the culture, and in some cases by the state, because in some democracies you're actually required to vote, and you're forced to have an opinion on what the government should do, rather than just tending to your crops or going to your local church. It forces people to have political opinions, and it promotes this kind of toxic disunity that's bad for society, and it promotes fighting over political opinions, and it promotes this toxic, this cancerous thing in the culture of political discourse. And so every 4 years, we have to have this cancerous thing in the political discourse where people are angry at each other over who's going to be president. And I don't think that this is good for the culture. I don't think that we should be forcing some random farmer in Iowa or some random construction worker in the big city to care about politics. Instead, these people should just be focusing on their jobs, their crops, their families, whatever hobbies they might have that they actually enjoy, as well as their local churches or whatever. So monarchists have a way of solving the problem of factions. We want to get rid of political parties outright. Ban political parties, don't have a democratic process in your society, and only the king and queen and other elites worry about politics. Everyone else needs to go back to their own lives. Everyone else needs to focus on just whatever they actually want to do. Don't worry about the government, don't worry about voting, don't worry about any of this crap. Only the king and queen and other people in kind of the elite class have to worry about this cancer called politics. So there are, of course, other non-democratic ideologies. Uh, so there's communism, there's a certain political ideology that came out of Italy, there's a certain other political ideology that came out of a certain Central European country, and there's the Putin government in Russia. Communism does not work as an economic system. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. When boomer cons or like neoconservatives say, oh, communism has failed in every single country, I'm sorry, but they're kind of right. Communism just doesn't work as an economic system. Now, of course, there are right-wing, non-monarchist, non-democratic ideologies too. There's the mid-century Italians, the mid-century Germans, and there's the Putin government in Russia. And sure, these types of governments are better than democracy, but monarchy, I think, is best. The issue that I have with these states is that they often take the form of a one-party state, but one-party states still have the problem that I see with the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States. It still creates mass politics. It still gets people involved in the political process. It forces people to engage with the political process rather than just get on with their own lives. And the other issue that I have with these states is they often have no clear successor. So if you look at the Soviet Union, it was often difficult to decide who was going to be the leader once Lenin or Stalin died. After Stalin died, there had to be like this, essentially this contest of who was going to be the leader of politicking and so on, and Khrushchev basically had to purge his opponents. And if we're going to be honest, if the mid-century Germans won World War II, they would have ran into the same problem. Once Tiny Mustache Man died, it wouldn't have been clear who the successor would have been. So now we get into one of the things that originally made me hesitant to become a monarchist in the first place. So Curtis Yarvin, he definitely gets some things right. He's right about the cathedral. But one of the big issues that I have with what's often referred to as NRX, or specifically Curtis Yarvin's version of NRX, is this idea that the monarchy should be like a corporate CEO. The problem with this idea is that if we're going to be honest, private capitalists have no reason to look out for the well-being of the people or the nation if they only want to make money, which is what a corporate CEO does. So if you have this epidemic of people becoming quote-unquote trans or something, why would a corporate CEO prevent that? From his perspective, LGBTQ people pay taxes, so there's no reason to stop their bad behavior as long as they pay taxes. Same goes for abortions. Women who get abortions pay taxes. So from a corporate CEO's perspective, there's no reason to stop women from getting abortions unless they fail to pay taxes. So that's so the main issue with Curtis that I have with Curtis Yarvin is that under his version of monarchy, th- there would be no reason for the corporate CEO to act in an ethical way or to look out for the interests of the people. So, what should monarchy look like? What I have in mind is something not like what Curtis Yarvin would propose, not like a libertarian utopia, but rather something more like Germany in 1871, except that it would be an absolute rather than a semi constitutional monarchy. I think that the monarchy should be nationalistic, conservative, and whatever the local religion is, and it should not be afraid to intervene in the economy and social life whenever it would be beneficial. And it should preserve the native ethnicity and culture. So none of this, n- none of what's going on right now with the whole mass immigration thing. Sorry. You gotta preserve native demographics. So monarchy and nationalism. I would say that my views on this subject have basically not changed. Um, I've pretty much since I've pretty much always been in favor of preserving ethnic distinctions, cultural distinctions, and so on. But many monarchists have this idea in their heads that nationalism itself is modern and was a product of the French Revolution. But this is false. It's really democracy which caused the rise of globalism and multiculturalism. Nations have always grown up around their respective royal families. So, as a monarchist, I would reject this current trend of the demographic replacement of Native Europeans and so on. We should preserve the existence of Native Europeans in their historical homelands. So, how do we reconcile these two ideas? How do we reconcile my idea of monarchy, that there should be a royal family governing the society, with the idea of nationalism? So, I would say the monarchy should be a mono-ethnic royal family. In the past, monarchies would intermarry with each other across ethnic lines, but there's no reason why future monarchies have to continue to do that. So I would say mono-ethnic royal families and no more intermarriages between royal families. Royal families should be culturally of the people. So the future French monarchy should be culturally French. It can't just be some random guy from Spain that just happens to be of royal blood. It has to be someone who's actually meaningfully French, both ethnically and culturally. And the king and queen should do nationalist policies, but without any kind of nationalist political party. So, yes, preserve native demographics. Yes, preserve the native ethnicity. But don't have a nationalist one party state. Don't have a political party that just monopolizes everything. Get rid of political parties entirely. And some historical examples of something like this would be King Zog I of Albania, who was very much a nationalist monarch for Albania, but also Germany from 1871 to 1918, as I mentioned before. So, how do we realistically restore monarchy? One of the big criticisms that I kind of have when it comes to a lot of monarchist movements is that they feel like they have to restore the original monarchies. They have to find who was the descendant of Louis XIV or Louis XVI and put the guy that would be in charge of France if Louis XVI had not been overthrown in charge of France, regardless of everything else. They only care about legitimacy and royal blood. The problem with this thinking is that there are two things that I have an issue with. First of all, other qualities matter besides just are you the legitimate monarch or not. We have to take into account the policies themselves. What is the monarch going to do once they're in power? Are they virtuous? Do they have good moral character? All of these things matter. You can't just say, oh, this person is the descendant of Louis XVI, therefore this person should be the dictator of France or something. That's ridiculous. So I don't really care about reviving the old monarchies of the past. What I care about is the system of monarchy itself, regardless of whether or not they are quote unquote legitimate. So I would say, and there's also the issue that modern descendants of royal families tend to be pro-democracy. So we can't just put some random guy on the throne just because he's descendant from Louis XVI, because he might be unsympathetic to the idea of France having an absolute monarch and just restore the old republic once he's in power. That was the mistake Franco did. Franco restored the original Spanish monarchy, but the guy he put in charge unfortunately turned out to be pro-democracy. So we're not going to make the same mistake again. So I would say that we should found completely new royal dynasties, even if they have common blood, and even if the person has no royal blood whatsoever. The person that we put in charge of the kingdom has to be a supporter of the idea of absolute monarchy to begin with, but they also have to have virtue. They have to have the correct political views. So to solve the problem that the two problems that I mentioned before, the founders of the new dynasty should be selected based on good policies and just agreement with the idea of absolute monarchy itself. But let's be honest, we're not going to get a king or queen anytime soon. So the best that we can do right now is damage control by moving things in the right direction. We should try to push for good policies even within a democracy to lessen its damage. So overturning Roe v. Wade was obviously a good thing, even though it didn't lead to the restoration of monarchy. And similar policies like that would be good. If we're going to have democracy, monarchists can still try to lessen the damage of democracy by reversing the worst policies of the democracy if we can, and getting the democracy to implement good policies. So yes, we are inherently against democracy, but some democratic politicians are better than others, and some policies within a democracy are better than others. Getting rid of Roe v. Wade was obviously a good thing, and the fact that getting rid of Roe v. Wade didn't get rid of the American Republic is irrelevant, because it was still a good thing. It lessened the damage done by democracy. And so we should try to push for good policies even within a democracy to lessen the damage. But we should also support right-wing governments and movements, especially ones that are authoritarian, even if they're not monarchist. So certain governments, even though they're not monarchist, I would say that monarchists should support certain governments in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and certain governments in Asia and the Middle East. Even though they're not monarchist, they are authoritarian, they're dictatorships, and they're definitely closer to what we would want than American democracy. And basically anything is better than liberal democracy at this point, to be honest. Generally speaking, anything that isn't liberal democracy is preferable to liberal democracy at this point. So, I am an ardent monarchist. Now, I still have sympathy for other types of authoritarianism, but I would say that I'm adamant that I believe absolute monarchy is the best possible system of government. Albeit I'm not really an ideologically pure monarchist. I believe that democracy should be viewed with utter contempt. In a perfect society, democracy at this point should be viewed with the same level of contempt that people would have for mid-century Italian ideology and the ideology of the mid-century Germans. And I look forward to the day when we can have our own Bismarck, Zog the First of Albania, or Philip II of Macedonia. Okay, so one more thing I forgot to mention. Yes, guys, I know I've been like away for an extremely long time, been busy with stuff, got lazy, and and both of those things caused a massive hiatus. And but as you can see, I'm back, gonna try to make more content, hopefully. Um, I guess I'm gonna shoot for like stuff like twice a month, I would say. But as you can see, my views when it comes to politics have drastically changed, and I'm definitely kind of going in a direction that is fairly similar to the views that I've had in in the past years ago, but definitely significantly different. I'm definitely so I would say that I don't know what I believe on everything, but when it comes to systems of government, I would say that I'm definitely fairly certain that monarchy is the best system of government. So, thank you.